Welcome to the Knowledge Entrepreneurs Show, where we celebrate the innovators driving change in the education industry. At Edison OS, we've worked with over 500 knowledge entrepreneurs to turn their edtech ideas into profitable businesses. Hi, Chris. Good morning. Welcome to the Knowledge Entrepreneur Show. Thanks so much for taking time out for this.
Yes, thank you. Hello, and I'm really happy to be here. I really appreciate the time to speak with you.
Thank you, Chris. It's a pleasure. Chris, I was, going through your LinkedIn page and, whatever I could, the website and stuff to understand what you do. And what I understood was that you run a company called Syncresis. There's a website, but LinkedIn says, it's become idea led growth or ideas led growth as of now,
That's
which you've
right.
been doing from 2007, if I'm not wrong. But before we get into this part, I want to go back a little bit and ask you, what was your plan? During your early days, was it always to do something related to what you're doing now, or how did you stumble upon this idea and how did you get into it?
That's a great question, and I think like a number of people, my plan from the very beginning of my career and what I'm doing now, as I've been a few decades into my career, are very different things. So, I
Okay.
actually started out in the world. I finished my undergraduate degree at a college in the U.S. I went to graduate school. I completed my doctorate in French literature, and my plan was to be an academic. I was going to be a professor in American universities, most likely, teaching French literature at the undergraduate and graduate level. And I did that for 2 years before I realized that after investing all of this time in getting my doctorate, devoting all of my energy and effort to an academic career, it really was not a great fit for me. My temperament was much more entrepreneurial. Academia, within U.S. universities, there's a lot of internal departmental politics. Everything is always kind of shifting sands and influence, and there's never any really concrete objective other than influence and hierarchy. And that environment was completely toxic to me. So I decided that I needed to get out. And after being on a tenure track position for 2 years at a university called Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia, I said, this is not working. This is not going to work. And I developed an exit strategy to get myself out of academia and into the business world.
Wow. Okay. I mean, I know that people, what they do, um, they don't really start out, but I haven't come across something this contrasting. French literature. It's not even English
Yes.
literature, it's French literature. And then,
Yeah.
you spend 2 years teaching it, and then, but that's great, it's better late than never, or, it's never too late to figure out what you want to do. But what I'm interested in, Chris, you said, you devoted all that time. What you thought at that point was your passion, and you spent 2 years. You were on your way to your tenure track, but you developed an exit strategy. What I want to ask you is, how easy or difficult was it to tell yourself that, okay, you know what, I've done all of these things for so many years, but I'm just going to go do something else? uh, I mean, was it like normal? Was it easy? Or, did you think you wasted a lot of time and you had that sort of a feeling about it when you
Mm.
were exiting?
That, that's a great question. What I would say is that it was about 3 months of, it's very emotionally and professionally challenging to realize, to go from realizing that the current situation I had created for myself was not working to defining, well, what would I do instead? It was about 3 months of, very challenging and difficult period for me, um, to figure out how that would work and what I would want to do and really make sure that I was making, it's a very big decision. So I wanted to make sure that I wasn't reacting to things that were happening in the department where I was teaching versus things that were common to the entire profession. And so during that 3 month period, a lot of introspection, and it was personally challenging. I will admit that. But from there, what I really did was I thought through systematically everything that I had learned and developed and created from a professional standpoint. What is transferable? What can I use as a stepping stone to new endeavors so that I'm still staying true to my most, I think, what I'd say my most powerful strengths and the things that I cared about the most.
Got it, Chris. Chris, while while you did that, did you have a certain direction from there? Okay, fine. This didn't work out. Well, I'm just going to do this. This is my next best interest. Or what was your next step? What helped you decide to choose whatever you chose after
Mm.
that exit?
So I actually did have a plan. That was one of the good parts of this 3 month period of challenge, is that I did focus on coming up with a very practical plan. It's, how do I get from one world of academia to another world of business, which is very different. And what I realized, there are a couple of things that I realized. As I mentioned, there were a lot of transferable skills. In my teaching experience, I was actually one of the very first um, university academics to be developing internet course materials for my students. This was very early days in, the first web 1.0 .com boom. All of these things were going on in the world, and when I first launched my courseware website, it was something I learned, built on my own from the ground up, from the HTML pages to setting up the web server to getting everything in place, because there was no technology support for academics and humanities, and I just always had that ability to figure things out and tinker and build. And what I did was I built interactive pages for my students so that when we would sit in the classroom, I wasn't telling them, we're reading in French, don't forget. So I wasn't telling them, what does this word mean? What is that what do you translate that sentence? I was giving them all the assistance in a very simple and basic early HTML environment. But if they didn't know who, let's say, King Louis XIV was, and there's a reference to it, they could click on it, and I would write a little blurb so that in the class we could focus on discussing the texts at a higher level. So the point behind telling that story is that the timing was fantastic. This was a period where there was so much surging interest in, that .com boom that was building at the end of the 90s. And I was able to say, all right, well, if I want to get from academia to the world of business where all this growth and change is happening, there is an intermediate step. And that intermediate step was in university administration. So administration is more similar to business than it is to the teaching side of the university world. And I found a position that helped other faculty understand and learn to use some of these emerging interactive technologies to support teaching and learning. And so I took this administrative position where now, instead of doing the teaching myself, I'm consulting with other teachers to learn what they want to do, how they want to build experiences, and what they want to teach their students. And as I was administering the money and the resources for developing these academic materials, because these initiatives were all funded by either public or private grants. And that was really the path that made my transition into the business world much smoother. Because now, not only am I good with language, which I always was, but I have technology skills, and I know how to manage resources, and I know how to develop and manage to budgets, and I know how to do project plans, and all of those things that you wouldn't expect a French professor to be able to do all of those things. But by working in this administrative environment, I had all of the skills and capabilities that I was able to bring to my final step out of academia, which was into a business world position with a company that developed hypertext platforms. It was a company that developed knowledge management and hypertext for customer support. So, someone calls a call center, they can't get their printer to work. The person on the phone doesn't necessarily have all of the steps and processes in place. So we would build systems that would allow them to go through this kind of diagnostic model of figuring out how to do the customer support on the phone. And it was interesting how, although that doesn't sound like it has anything to do with French literature, some of those core skills about figuring out, well, I don't know something and I'm reading this text and I have to learn something from it and then apply that knowledge. I mean, I feel like it was a combination of lucky and clever to be able to figure out how those two things could actually relate to each other. And then from there, once I was in the business world, it was obviously much more seamless and streamlined to get positions at other firms and move from there into a more consulting kind of role, which is what I was doing prior to starting my own company.
Got it, Chris. So it is very organic the way you kind of moved on from your teaching role, but you didn't move out of the industry. You were within the university education, but then you just changed your role, and then it was knowledge, and then from what I understand, from what I see right now, of course, you do specific things related to content marketing, but it falls under content marketing. And I love the way you describe some of the things on your website, and the thought leadership thing, and helping other companies put their ideas out. But you've been doing this for almost, it's going to be a couple of decades in a couple of years
That's
now.
right.
And so content marketing is what you've eventually kind of settled down into. But even when you said your transition wasn't really about marketing, you've been talking about business world, and you spoke about how you familiarized yourself with technology. How did then again you decided, okay, marketing is the thing that I'm going to do, consulting, and get into that? I thought, the way you shared so far, it looks like someone who'd go on to probably build an edtech company, or,
Right.
something like that. But then, you kind of moved into marketing. And then I see that you work with companies like, industries, the banking industries and stuff like that, which is pretty much mainstream.
Yeah, so that was, I would say the most pivotal part of my professional experience for that was in the early 2000s. I worked at a small consulting firm, and that consulting firm built out internal intranet systems to help businesses and help employees within those businesses do their jobs more effectively, either accessing HR information, accessing sales information, accessing materials. And at the beginning of my career in that firm, it was really much more focused on just, what's the content strategy, what's the navigation structure, how do people move around through these systems. But as I developed more professional skills, it became much more about, well, what's the overall strategy here? How are we trying to connect this particular internal internet platform to the company's operational and strategic goals? And because it's consulting, you get to try on all sorts of different industries. And I have worked in the ed tech space actually.
Okay.
I had done a bunch of work in consumer packaged goods and consumer products, like foods and candies and beverages and all those kinds of things. I also did a lot of work in healthcare, but the other piece of it that I started to work on in this firm and found really interesting was financial services. And that was a really valuable experience for me in that by working in a consulting firm, I was able to sample across a whole set of different industries and find what was most interesting and most relevant to me. And financial services was really it. And it actually did start to close the loop with French literature. And you're going to think like, how could that possibly be? Well, the reason why is that financial services is really its own language. The way people talk, especially in the very institutional areas of financial services, large scale investment management, hedge funds, fintech platforms that are used by banks, not by retail consumers. There is a whole complicated language and structure and philosophy and way of looking at the world behind that. And that's how it did connect to everything that I learned from graduate school and in academia is how do you quickly come to terms with an entirely different language, different ways of looking at the world, often, high volumes of very complicated text, whether it's literary text or text about things like regulation or financial policy. All of those things, that there was enough in common across them that I realized that of all of these industries, the one that is most complex and the one that's most exciting to work on is financial services. And so that's how I got to that point. But it always had that undercurrent of focusing on how do you use content to help people make decisions. And that's sort of what I think is my unique spin on content marketing is marketing can be how do you get attention? How do you get eyeballs, clicks, engagement, all these things. Marketing can also be about how do you help people make decisions, which is especially true in the space where I work, which is institutional finance. If you are the chief investment officer or the chief technology officer at a multi-billion dollar hedge fund, you have very high stakes decisions to make about what platforms you use, how you conduct your investments, how you comply with regulations. And what I realized with in financial services, the sweet spot is doing content marketing that not only communicates the benefits of a particular product or platform, but helps those prospects understand the unique challenges that they have and make better decisions about them.
Got it, Chris. Uh, Chris, one of the common things that I touch upon with almost everyone is a transition phase that people undergo. Of course, we've spoken about your biggest transition. That's fine. But then, we are at a space where you're already consulting and you've kind of zeroed down on your financial services domain is probably, what you figured out is what interests you. And then you go on to start your own company and then, go independent. But when you're consulting, is it really like is that transition a big deal at all? Because even as a consultant, you're pretty much an entrepreneur within the consulting firm because you still have to figure out just on behalf of someone else. It's just not what you're doing for your own company, but that's the only difference. But from, let's say, the mindset, approach, and everything, is it much of a transition, or is it only got to do with getting to a point where you make as much money as you were making on a constant basis when you were not an entrepreneur?
Yeah, no, I think it is there's a level in which you really, although it happens organically, it's planned organic. It's more like farming than just weeds growing off somewhere. You really have to come up with an approach for even if you can't see with 100% certainty what what things look like 3 or 4 moves ahead. You have a sense of a general trajectory. I'm headed this way. So as I got into the later stages of my experience at that consulting firm that I mentioned, I started to realize, there are ways that I could do this independently. What do I have to learn? So working closely with the people on the business development team, working closely with operations, with finance, and understanding, well, I need to learn all these other pieces in order to be able to run my own business. And the point that I want to make about that is for any kind of transition, I guess there are 2 rules of thumb that I would say. One of which is always be learning. I'll always have your antenna up. I would never have realized that institutional finance is an exciting and compelling space for me if I hadn't been listening and not only just doing the work on the different projects, but really listening to senior stakeholders and executives in that industry to say, well, there's more here. There's more here for me. And it's really it's learning as much as possible all the time. And then the second rule of thumb that I want to say is you're never done transitioning, right? So I think my personal philosophy is that there is no end point in a career until you stop. And
Right.
up until that point where you decide that this is enough, I'm retiring, um, you're really continuing to transition and shift and grow. And you even mentioned this at the beginning of the show. So the company that I started in 2007, I named it Synchrosis. We were much more focused on not only the content strategy, but building out the digital environment. And over time, I realized, well, it's kind of low margin and very challenging from an operational perspective to be in this business of, I mean, ultimately building web platforms, which was part of my business in that early phase of the business. I call it Synchrosis 1.0, where we would not only come up with a communication strategy for the client, but we'd build their website. And what that meant was much bigger teams, lots of resources to manage. It meant sometimes phone calls at 3 in the morning. Our website is down, and I don't know. I like to keep things a little bit easier, and I found that the more compelling strategic work that there are plenty of other agencies and resources that can build out the actual digital assets. What's missing is the strategy and the content quality. And so that's where I decided to focus the business. So even then, you'd think, well, okay, if I finally started my own business and that's where I'm going to stay from now on. That's not really true. And so Synchrosis 2.0 was all about focusing on, instead of the whole digital platform, really focusing on the strategy and the content development. And now there's Synchrosis 3.0. I recently, actually, it was just last Friday, I sent the announcement email to my existing clients and I've started to promote it online. I've renamed Synchrosis Ideas Led Growth. And the reason why is that because the more that I focus on how the content marketing connects with the company's entire strategy, when you're really looking in a thought leadership type content environment, what you're doing is you're bringing out individuals and companies' strongest and best ideas that have the highest commercial promise. And that is really the engine that many companies use for growth. It's how they win new clients, it's how they grow their business, it's how they enter new markets, and it's how they continue to innovate and offer new things to allow them to grow as a business. And what I've been learning over the past, I'd say 18 months or so, is that every time we bumped into a really challenging content marketing situation, it was actually a strategy situation. There was a lack of consensus around where the product should go, or what services the firm should be delivering, or how to position them, or how they related to things that were either competitive or complementary in the market. And so more and more of the conversations were actually about the growth strategy that the content marketing would support. And I realized, well, the next evolution of Synchrosis needs to concentrate on that. So yes, we still develop the content strategy. Yes, we still develop the high quality content that's very focused on these institutional topics, but we also work with companies to figure out, well, the content is often, it's either a symptom of what's wrong with the company, or it's the solution, the cure for what's wrong with the company, if you design it the right way and you engage the right people the right way. And that's what we've been doing more recently.
Got it, Chris. Chris, it's really interesting, the work that you do, and I'm going to get into it. But before that, I just got one more question from around the time that you started Synthesis, and then I'll move on to what you do now.
Sure.
It's a question that I'd like on behalf of my listeners. When you said, when you were moving on from being a consultant for another company and when you decided to start up or go independent and do it on your own, I'd like to understand what were your reasons to do that. at the
I think
point
that
at the point, and maybe you can weigh how do you see it from now. It's totally fine. I just want to know.
sure.
Yeah.
Sure. I mean, I think my most fundamental reason was looking for autonomy. As I grew and developed professionally, I had great relationships with the leadership within the firm where I worked, and I was, ultimately became part of their leadership team. But I wanted to do things. I mean, it sounds a little bratty in a way to say I wanted to do things my own way, but I really did have this vision for the right way to handle content strategy and to work with clients. And that wasn't always 100% aligned with what my colleagues at this firm wanted to do. And, there's, it's valuable to work in an environment where you have to build consensus and work with others and have that teamwork effect. But I think there's also a value to autonomy. And it was a sense of, I'm looking for that more autonomy. I have a vision for the way these things should work. And I feel ready to build out my own firm. And based on all that, it was, that was the move to make at that time.
Got it, Chris. And was the opportunity to be able to make more money for yourself, it doesn't matter how much of a reason was it, but was it any reason at all? Was it part of the whole reason at all? The fact
You
that you can
know,
make more money?
not so much. I mean, I think if anything, in the first couple of years, I probably was doing less well financially than I had been. You get your salary, your benefits are covered, um, you get bonuses, all those things, and they just sort of happen. It's just like food being dropped in your mouth, and you don't have to do much other than do your work. Once you're running your own business, like, oh no, if I don't keep this motor running, if I don't reach out to new clients, if I don't generate new work, there's going to be a point where there's no more cash. And like, what do I do? So it was actually, I'd say it was in the short term, it was less financially secure, but in the long term, I think there was obviously the financial benefits of being an owner of a firm versus being a salaried employee.
Got it, Chris. Great. I'm now gonna jump right into uh, synthesis and maybe synthesis and ideas led growth. It doesn't really matter about the company that we're talking about. I just want to talk about
Right,
content
right.
marketing. And my first question to you would be, what, according to you, already touched upon this a little bit, but I'm gonna like come back to you again with the same question. What, in your opinion, is content marketing? What does it mean for an organization, especially for a financial services organization today?
Yeah, that's such a wide question in a good way because that phrase content marketing, if you spend more than 5 minutes on LinkedIn, you will be drowned in content about content about content about marketing. It's this very kind of circular environment where at the end of the day, give me an example of marketing that doesn't have content. And you could easily ask the question, like, what are you even talking about? Of course, it's content marketing. Of course, you're producing content to convey a message. I mean, what else are you doing? Waving your hands on the top of a hill? Of course, there's content. So when I think about that, it's almost a meaningless term. Now, I know within the profession of content marketing, the idea is that it's marketing that puts content quality at the top of the pyramid. So, in other words, instead of creating an ad that's intended to get, let's say it's a digital ad that's intended to get clicks and generate leads, it's about creating a more extensive, information rich, message rich asset, maybe a series of blog posts or a white paper or something that will engage prospects at a deeper and more substantial level. And I think that's really the nugget of content marketing that's worth taking away is that it's a way of looking at marketing that puts the value of content higher up in the hierarchy of needs than it might be in a traditional marketing strategy. And so you generate a lot of content that's focused on your audience needs as a way to attract them rather than using things that try to attract them and then engage them.
Got it, Chris. Chris, you also mentioned in the start that content marketing. It's as much although it is about getting eyeballs, it's about getting attention. It's also to help the customer make the right decision, right? Especially, for example, if you are helping someone market their financial tool made for institutions, you also brought out a point that you got to make marketing in a way that the institutions are able to make the right choice, make it easier for them to decide whether what is it and what is it not.
That's
But
right.
marketing is not always like that. There's a bit of a gray area sometimes. And there should be probably a balance between attracting eyeballs and really genuinely helping the prospect choose or not to choose your product. So how do how easy or difficult as a marketing person for you it is to drive this point to your clients? I mean, do you help yourself by choosing the right kind of clients, or you just dive into it and then you do your thing once you start working with your clients? I hope
Yeah,
I'm
it's
not confused you with the question. It was all over the
no,
place.
no, that's I definitely understand what you're asking. So, it's a little bit of both, to be honest. So, I certainly prefer working with clients that already have at least a similar view of how content works in the overall marketing ecosystem and how they use content to build relationships. But it's still true that, many people in marketing departments inside companies, the way that they measure their results is through numbers, right? So what are those numbers look like? Those numbers look like numbers of views, numbers of clicks, and the numbers that are used to measure marketing impact are already tilted toward the eyeballs side of the world versus toward the decision making side of the world. It's very hard to measure your impact on making a decision. It's much more qualitative. But there's a big difference between, let's say we'll try to use generically one of my clients. If we work on a set of insights about how to solve a particular institutional financial problem, and they post it on LinkedIn, and let's say they're a large bank or a large institution, they've already got a lot of followers, and they get, I don't know, 10,000, 15,000 views on their post. You'd think that would be like, okay, great, this is a marketing win. How many of the actual buyers of sometimes these multi-million dollar solutions or platforms are within that 15,000? My argument is that it's probably zero, and extremely unlikely that it's less than like that it's more than single digits of actual decision makers who see that and say, "Oh, I'm going to do something about what I've done." The real answer is much more, um, the other side. How I work with clients is that they some clients told me a story the other day about how they brought a couple of their recent articles. Like, this sounds so low tech and low value, but like, hear me out for a second. They brought some printouts to a conference. They handed a couple of those printouts to prospective clients who said, "That's great. I'd love to have a meeting and conversation." So they had a meeting and conversation with the sales team at the conference, because they were also doing one-on-one meetings behind the scenes. And the feedback back to me was the quality of that conversation with the potential client, the issues that they were talking about were so much richer and so much more material that it was resulted in almost direct conversion. Like, yes, we want to do business with you.
Wow.
And that's, how would you measure it? If you're a marketing person and you're saying, well, you want to be able to, as a CMO, you want to be able to show your numbers to the rest of the executive team. And you say, well, we handed it to three people at a conference. It's going to sound dismal. It's going to sound absolutely awful. But the reality is, those it's already so targeted and so close to their decision making process that you have every likelihood of winning the business of two of those three people. versus zero? Would you rather have 0% of 15,000 or would you rather have 66% of three?
The latter, of course. Yeah.
Of course, especially when you're talking about multi-million dollar deals. And so I fully admit some of these things are very unique to the industry that I work in, but I do feel like some of these concepts are transferable even in much more mass market. Like, let's say you have some kind of software as a service platform and people are subscribing for, I don't know, make up numbers like $499 a year to some service or some platform that they use in a B2B context. Even then, I think helping them understand in a different way what their challenges are and what the options are for solving them will improve your ultimate sales numbers in a way that just generating numbers and likes and clicks in digital channels will not.
Right. Got it, Chris. Chris, you
And
spoke
so,
about,
yeah.
sorry, did I
No,
cut
I
you
was going to
short?
say I just wanted to come back because I felt like I didn't fully answer your question. So there are a lot of clients that start to understand that, and as the longer we work together, the more they say, "Wow, this actually is really working." And one of the things that I love seeing as an outcome is if I can help teach my clients to stop worrying about numbers from a marketing perspective and start thinking about impact, even if it's very qualitative, I feel like I've done a piece of like my overall mission in the world of making marketing work better. That's just how I want to end the answer to the previous question.
Got it. To me, it was answered when you asked me the question: would you prefer 0% of 15,000 or
Right.
66% of three?
Right.
It's it's a no-brainer, right? And obviously, what you do for it to get such focused people is gonna be even more difficult but valuable than just putting out a post there and getting 15,000 views or 10,000 views or whatever it is,
That's
because
right.
it's not even a human thing. I'm not saying that humans are more accurate than the algorithms and whatever we have on the internet, but it's still hit or miss pretty much. And even if decision makers were to see the post, if they were to be part of the 15,000, I don't think anytime soon, I don't want to make any blanket statements. Anytime soon, I don't see the human response or the human touch, face to face, going to be replaced by the ease of connecting live in person is still, way more valuable than a post on social media. So that's how I took that. Um, so Chris, going back to you spoke about how you were doing a lot of things, when you had synthesis, and then now you've moved on to ideas-led growth, and you want to focus more on strategy and probably let others take care of the digital tools and stuff like that. When you say strategy, content strategy, with a company, like, what's your starting point like? Is a company coming to you? There are two situations here I'm imagining. There's a company that's already trying stuff and it's not working, and then they're coming to you. And then there's a company that's just starting off, and then they want to have someone from the beginning. How does strategy work for both of these companies? I'm assuming it's easier to work with companies that have failed and that come to you because you have a point of reference, versus a company that's coming directly off, fresh after its finding.
Yeah, no, those are two slightly different scenarios. So a lot of times what happens is when, the companies will come to me because they've been trying a bunch of things and they're really just not working, as you said. And um, a, a lot of the times what that looks like in very practical terms is it's a very particular project. Maybe it's one line of business, or maybe it's one campaign or one product or something where they've placed a lot of emphasis and a lot of value on getting that out to the market, and the content around it just isn't working, or they've tried to do it internally and they just don't have the internal writing and creative skills, or they worked with an agency and that agency is more of a generalist and they don't understand the highly specific nature of institutional finance. And so the quality, the relevance of the content just isn't there, and they need help with that. So that's not really a particularly strategic question, but it opens the door to a lot of strategic questions around, well, what is missing with the content? It's not just the surface level quality of the writing, hopefully. That, I mean, that's a very basic and low level problem. It's much more about, as I was saying before, does the concept, not the content, but the concept of what you're trying to say actually matter to your target audiences? And that's how all of a sudden it blossoms into this strategy question of, well, the real strategic question is, what decisions are we trying to get people to make? We're trying to get people to understand maybe that their approach to investment data is very inefficient and they're wasting a lot of time, or maybe they're having a hard time with some of the workflows around their investments, or maybe they're having a hard time just completing big transactions. And why do they have those problems? Well, my clients typically, when I push them, when I ask them lots of questions, they have a lot of insights about why their clients have those problems. And that becomes a much stronger thing to talk about than like, oh, well, here's our brief for how this product works. So it becomes that strategic question because it forces my clients to really think in very detailed and clear terms how what they're doing aligns to some need that's outside of their four walls. And that's really the start of the strategic question. So even those topics or those projects and client relationships that come to me because they tried something and it broke or it didn't work end up in that very strategic place very quickly. And then to your point, I typically work, I'd say about 70% of my business is companies that I would call incumbents, right? They're already in place.
Yeah.
Some of my clients have been in business for decades and actually a couple for like centuries plus. Some of these banks have been around for a really long time. And so they're a very different animal from a disruptive fintech that either they've already got some traction and they're generating sales, and now they need to do things in a more systematic way to get to the next level, to reach that next tier of the market. And I do work with some truly startup companies as well on a consultative basis. I actually partner with a couple of accelerator programs as well to say, well, what if you started thinking about these things from the beginning, not years later after you've already, well, hopefully scrambled and managed to get a few clients, but what if you systematically built thought leadership and content strategy into every aspect of your business? And that's again where it comes to ideas-led growth. It's because the thought leadership crystallizes what are those unique ideas that turn into products and services that you offer into the market.
Got it, Chris. Chris, this kind of leads me to another thought. I'd like to ask, what is a bigger problem in your view, from what you've seen, when it comes to marketing? When people come to you with their problems, what do you think is a bigger problem? Is it that appearing in front of the right people is a bigger problem, or sharing the right messaging to the people is a bigger issue here? You see what I mean? In first case, let's say you've got the messaging right, but then you're not in front of the right people. Second case, you're in front of the right people, but your messaging is off. What is a bigger problem?
Yeah, I guess it's hard to answer that question in a straightforward way because I would say it depends on how far off you are, right? So if you have close to the right message, but it's not 100% perfect, it makes much more sense to focus on getting it to the right people because it's close enough to begin the conversation. And sometimes even the interactions with the right audience are the things that will help you reinforce and perfect your messaging. So I would say if your messaging is 10% off, That's not a real number, but you know what I mean. If it's some
Yeah,
small
yeah.
amount off, focus on the audience. If your messaging is perfect, but you're getting it, truly to the wrong audience, that 90% of the people that you talk to are not potential buyers or prospects, then you should focus on fixing the audience problem, because the two of them really do come together. It's the right message because it connects with the right people. I could have the exact right message for the products and services that I serve, and if I bring it to the wrong audience, then it doesn't really matter what work I've done and what I'm able to bring to market, because those are not the buyers. So that's
Got it,
but
Chris.
it's the process of interacting with, when I have conversations with chief marketing officers or other executives within my clients, I- I'm already learning how to perfect and improve that messaging, because again, it's kind of like what I was saying about transition. You're never done perfecting your message. There's no such thing as an endpoint. By the time you get that endpoint, things will have moved in the market enough where you already need to start making adjustments. Competitors are chasing you. Things change in terms of just the overall environment or climate. When you're dealing with finance, of course, economies change, credit conditions change, interest rates change, whatever it might be, and that has this downstream impact onto what matters to people.
Got it, Chris. Chris, you said you mostly help people. You already addressed this issue. Be it a mass market or a very focused multi-million kind of deals, multi-million dollar deals. The marketing varies to a large extent, but the
That's right.
principles can be applied to the mass scale as well. But from what I've discussed with you, you're working mostly with people, where there are multi-million deals that are involved. And the moment you're talking about marketing, most of the people, the things that come to their head is, it would be email marketing, like you started, with saying a post with 15,000 views and stuff like that. Now, in the multi-million dollar deals, when you interact with people, how much of education is needed for you to kind of convince them of what are the trends in the market, and it's not really numbers and stuff. Are the people that come to you, that talk to you, are already receptive or already aware of the style of marketing that they need, or is there some sort of an education that you need to start off with and then help them understand this is what it is?
Yeah, so that's a question. The answer to that question has changed a lot in, I'd say, the past 2 years, maybe even 1 year. Um, my sense of things is that people are increasingly tired of all the attention getting games and the algorithm games. How do you hack the algorithm? How do you just generate more and more and more content? Um, many marketers are just tired of that. They see it as high effort, low value, and just going back a few years, when people had to make that transition during the COVID-19 pandemic, and so many people are now working from home, you lose that chance to have like face-to-face interactions, and just so much of the nature of how people interact with each other changed for an extended period of time. We got into this situation like, well, the only channel that matters is digital. And it was already an issue before, but COVID accelerated this idea of, well, in order to get people's attention, the only option we have is to flood digital channels with as much noise as possible and to be the person who's left yelling the loudest. That is exhausting. And 2 years or so ago, it was a much harder conversation for me to say, this is not the right way to do it, because I had to do it on the basis of like, here's this philosophical principle about the right way to treat people, the way to handle decision makers, looking at their decision making with dignity, not capitalizing unnecessarily on their attention, valuing their time and effort, all those kinds of things. They seem like very just like this high level, fuzzy philosophical points of view. But after you've been in it for now for like two plus years of this just huge tsunami of digital noise that's only getting worse, so many times I have conversations with marketers, and it's like this emotional confession that they make to me, like, we're exhausted. We're so tired of doing all of this high effort stuff that really begets almost nothing in terms of results. And what I'm finding is that the conversation and the openness to, well, there has to be some better way of looking to people and treating them with dignity and respect as decision makers, that is resonating more and more recently. And I what I believe, and kind of what I sincerely hope, I would say, is that the next wave of digital noise, which is this almost endless, infinite AI generated content, will exhaust marketers even further. And those of us who are thinking, truly strategically about people making decisions, will focus even more on looking at things in the way that the way that I look at them. And there are plenty of other people in the world of marketing that have similar ideas about focusing on the quality of the interaction rather than the quantity. I don't want to pretend I'm the only one or that I've invented this, but I do see this as a wave or a trend, and it gets easier and easier to have those conversations with my clients the more those kinds of ideas are propagating out into the world.
Got it, Chris. Also, thank you for using the words that you did, because I almost forgot something that I wanted to bring up today. While I was going through your LinkedIn profile, you also run another initiative called as kindness communication, which is parallelly going on. And I realized the way you just spoke, I don't know if you meant it, but it came across to me that there was a lot of underlying theme of kindness in the way you said, although it may not have been explicit, or maybe you didn't even mean it. uh, but anyway, I'd like to take this opportunity to kind of touch upon that topic. So what is the kindness communication, or please correct me if I'm using the wrong words, that you're doing? What is your motive intention behind that? And is that tied up to what you do, at Ideas Led Growth, Chris?
Yeah, it is tied. So I'd answer the question about kindness communication at a couple of levels. So I did launch a website and start blogging on this topic, and I haven't been doing it actively for a bit of time, just because I've been so focused on Synchrosis and then ideas led growth. But I did it because I really do believe that when people communicate with each other, we have a responsibility to communicate with a respect and a kindness towards each other that sometimes has been very missing from the way businesses look at the world. And even in the world of marketing, you look at some of these words and metaphors. You talk about targeting people. If you think for more than 10 seconds about what that implies, it's really extremely unkind. It's violence. There's actually a lot of violence in marketing language. And I know it's not meant with violence, but it implies that people are there to be used, right? You
Yeah.
exist in order for me to get something from you. And if I get your attention and then I get something from you, like transaction complete, we're done. Kindness communication is much more about how, I just have this deep personal belief that we have interpersonal responsibilities in how we communicate and engage with each other. And the kindness communication piece is more like the philosophy lessons, the ethics behind it. But that is 100% how I look at everything around marketing strategy. And even strategy, like that's the thing, is the more you examine marketing language, the more you realize how military it is. Strategy, campaign, targeting, or in more casual sense, you see all these people that talk about how do you hook someone. If you've ever seen a fish get hooked and you look at what that looks like, it's painful, it's horrible, it is unkind, rather than engaging with, supporting, providing input to, respecting. I do believe that those have marketing value. It's not just being about so kind of soft and theoretical and unpragmatic. This is actually very pragmatic, and that if you engage human to human with someone who has a real world decision to make that has very high stakes for themselves, for their company, and for their company's clients, and if you honor all of that in the way that you do your marketing will absolutely take off and generate more of these positive decisions that translate into commercial results for your business.
Got it, Chris. Before this, when you were talking about marketers being exhausted, this is pretty much, what I kind of heard from you in a very different way. And that's what kind of, reminded me of kindness. And I think from what you've spoken so far and what you've shared about your beliefs on marketing, I think that's kind of uh, been there, even though not explicitly, it's kind of there
Mm,
behind your messaging. That's what I think. And another thing that I wanted to touch upon, Chris, is in the, I was reading through your profile and I came across words like crypto and DEFI. It's pronounced DeFi,
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 DeFi.
DeFi. Okay, it's
Yeah,
decentralized finance. Is that correct?
that's right.
Okay, got it. So you've been in, but a fun question before I get into crypto and DeFi. You've been into consulting for financial services since 2007. I think Bitcoin came in at about 2010, 29, 2011,
Yeah,
something
that's
like
right.
that. Are you in on Bitcoin since then by any chance?
No, I wish. I wish I'd been smarter about that because, I was actually thinking about that the other day. So I feel like most people, I played around with it a little bit later than I should have. And then, of course, you always have that fantasy scenario of like, well, what if I bought 10,000 Bitcoins when they were a penny or two a piece? And how like what would my financial situation look like? But there's no rewind button here, so we don't get to do that. I wish I had. But it's been an amazing source of innovation, and most people see it from the cryptocurrency and the Bitcoin side. But as you mentioned with DeFi, there are also a lot of innovators that are building financial applications that use the underlying technology, the blockchain,
Right, right.
to do a lot of clever and innovative things that make financial transactions happen more seamlessly with less friction. And though that to me is intellectually, that is the more interesting piece. There's kind of like the numbers thrill of the Las Vegas game of seeing how the value of Bitcoin and the other digital currencies changes over time. But there's a longer term play, which is the way in which this underlying technology will make everything ultimately easier, even dealing with real world assets. Like if I wanted to invest in a bunch of buildings, what does Bitcoin have to do with that? Well, if those buildings can be what they call in the industry tokenized. In other words, there is a way of representing them on the blockchain. It's a lot easier to buy into than actually going and buying that building.
Right.
And so things like that will over time, like I think this is much more on the like 5 to 10 year horizon of how Bitcoin and the blockchain platforms that other cryptocurrencies are built on will transform finance and create they'll create more economic value within the world.
Got it, Chris. Chris, I'm gonna come to a point where I'm gonna pick your brain a little bit to help people from two
Sure.
spheres. One are there are as you said, there are a lot of people really passionate about blockchain who really understand blockchain, and I've heard a lot of people around me talk about how it could solve a lot of problems for us here in India. uh, you know for starters, how to kind of remove corruption at various levels. Blockchain would be
Mm-hmm.
an amazing and a straightforward tool if of implemented. So there are people, a lot of, very passionate, and they want to get into, something related to blockchain. They may not be technically savvy to code and stuff like that, but the trend that I see is, again, marketing related. So they, what is the way forward for them? The common approach that people take is that, they go on to do some certification courses, which kind of gives them some credibility. Something's better than nothing sorts. But where do they really start off? How does someone really penetrate, or, get an entry into this market from a marketing standpoint?
Yeah, and that's such an interesting question about an area that it is still emerging, even though it has been around now, as you say, since the early 2010s. There are a lot of developments, and there's a lot of maturity that needs to happen in that industry. I do think it's helpful to learn more about the technologies and the infrastructure, uh, but the other thing is coming back to this idea of messaging. At the end of the day, you still need some kind of transformative idea. And I really do believe this about every product, whether it's institutional finance or even a candy bar, like everything between those two as well. Every single product, I should say, is an idea about change. Even a piece of candy is an idea about how you're going to change the experience of that person who puts it in their mouth. It's going to have a flavor that's different from the thing that was there before. Maybe there's a flavor innovation or a texture innovation, all the way to like these massive, large scale innovations in the global financial infrastructure, right? All of them are ideas about change. And so my point is that getting into this space really forces you to be very clear and very articulate about what is your idea of change. And that is what I think has been the downfall. And why has it taken so long for these crypto innovations to start to get broader traction in the world? Is it's been such a private little bubble. All these crypto people talking crypto to each other and very rarely figuring out ways how to communicate outside the bubble. That is in part one of the contributing factors to the collapse of cryptocurrency when people talked about crypto winter last year and the year before. It's because it was such a private little world that there was no way in than to be in. And so no messaging was getting out of the bubble. A long time ago, this was several years ago, where I had this whole message and I wrote a blog post and did this whole thing about it's time for crypto to stop being cryptic. And it's still a challenge in the industry where it's a highly specialized vocabulary. There's a lot of technical details. People are very focused on the technology details now. You need to learn them and know them in order to build something in a practical sense, but you also need to be able to talk about them in a broader arena. Imagine if people within just in the world of websites and how basic and fundamental things like websites are now. Imagine if people were still focused on talking about the the mechanics of the HTTP protocol and how servers work and how client machines or browsers or other software were pulling information from servers. If they were still focusing on the technical details of that, the whole internet revolution would not have happened. There has to be that transition point where people learn to articulate the value outside of the bubble. And what I believe is that, coming back to your point about crypto, is that people entering that space now who really focus on honing their ideas as well as their ability to build something are the ones that will have the long-term success in the industry and be the ones who are genuinely able, instead of just theoretically able, to solve global economic challenges, like you mentioned, corruption. Another big global challenge is, there are billions of people who don't have access to any financial system. They're unbanked. Crypto, one of the promises of crypto is that it takes banks out of the middle and allows those people to engage in healthier financial activity instead of only being caught in a gray market and all the inequity of that. All of that's true, but someone still has to figure out how do you get the messaging outside of just building the technology is already there to solve those problems. It's that idea and that clear and articulate communication of the idea that engages other people that's still missing. And so that would be if I were starting something new now, it would really be about working, developing and articulating that idea that is, yes, maybe it uses the blockchain and the crypto infrastructure.
Got it, Chris. Chris, probably my concluding question to you, more to do with first principles of marketing. It's got to do, with people who teach, or coach. Now, people who really teach, let's say, test prep, or they coach or offer their knowledge to kind of help others. It's pretty straightforward the way it's happening right now. There's nothing new that's going to happen or something like that in the way people find clients. But one of the things that I've always been curious about is that two people offering the same services, one of them is able to charge an average amount of money, and then there's this other person that I see who's able to charge way more than the average,
Mm.
like 5 times or even 10 times. It's just unbelievable. How do you see this? And it's not really got to do with the content or the subject matter, right? But probably other stuff. How do you see this, and what is the framework if you have to give a mental model or a starting point for people to maybe go towards it? What would your advice be to teachers or coaches to be able to kind of charge that premium kind of money to people?
Yeah. Yeah, so that is a really interesting question because there are a lot of commodity type services, whether it's in the education world, things like test prep, or in the financial world, payment processing. There's so many commodity ways of doing that. The strongest way to be able to elevate your pricing and your positioning is to figure out what you can label as only you. And what I mean by that is, even in an area of test prep, it might be that you focus on a very particular segment of students, some unique combination of, maybe their language, their gender, their identities, their academic skills. If you're really focused on being the person, and I'm making this up, this may or may not be a good one, but students who have um, attention deficit challenges, who
Right,
are
right.
better with language than they are with math. And if your focus is, I'm the test prep person that helps those students refocus and master the testing questions around math problems, that's a unique positioning that allows you to say, like, all right, well, then I do elevate my pricing a little bit. Or maybe I'm also, you figure out when I say only you, obviously those things there can be others who do it, but the more that you're able to specialize and narrow it down to, like, only you are the person who specifically supports this type of student with these challenges, the better positioned you are to elevate your pricing. And so that's what I think is one of the stronger approaches to doing it. And then another approach is, honestly, pricing is many things. One of the things I want to focus on, it's a signal you send to the market. It's already, by putting a price on your services, you're already adding an element to the way that they are positioned, right? People talk about the 4 Ps of marketing. Pricing is an important signal that says, look, what I do is a premium and high value service. Now, you have to justify that pricing, otherwise, your business will collapse really quickly. But even just having that boldness to say, no, maybe I am underpricing. And I'm going to just elevate my pricing a little bit and see, does that bring in a different kind of client? And it often does. And then it's kind of this virtuous cycle of, as you as you raise your pricing, you attract different segments of a market that in turn elevate your offering, which in turn elevates your rate, and you can run your business that way and escape this commodity trap of something that is same outcomes, same process, and same messaging as everyone else in the world offering something similar.
Got it, Chris. Chris, sorry, I did say that this was going to be my concluding question, but just another question.
No, sure.
I just missed out on this particular thing. The transition from synthesis to ideas-led growth probably will conclude with this topic. What have been your major challenges? I clearly understand that the way you're going from doing more non-repetitive work, that's where you've kind of chosen to go from building something that's digital versus working more towards strategy and idea, more to do with cerebral sort of a work. But is it as easy as it is being said, or what are the challenges that you faced transitioning? Was it simple? Did you have to convince your clients, or getting new clients? Because as I asked again, clients, when they talk to marketing people, they kind of expect a certain well-rounded package. So how difficult
Right.
is it to kind of sell yourself only as helping them with their ideas alone?
Yeah. So one of the things is I am being careful to make sure that the content development piece of it is still an active part of what we do, but it's also understanding all of the things that go before and after it to create business growth. So that's the first piece, is not making sure to preserve the most important piece of the value of what existed before. So that was one way. And then some of the transition difficulties are really the least interesting pieces of it. Like in the US, you have to register something called a doing business as, a DBA. So Syncrasys, I'm keeping Syncrasys because all my business accounts are under that. All of
Right.
my existing contracts are under that. So it was really more just like the mechanics of
Got
dealing
it.
with corporate infrastructures, migrating over my email addresses, like all of those little things. You do have to be prepared. If you're going to make that kind of pivot, you have to realize that it's going to take time and effort and a little bit of money even just to pay for these things to happen. So being really clear, like, is it worth it? Is the outcome worth it? And I thought the outcome would be worth it. So that, I think those are really the challenges. And then clients are actually my existing clients. Most of my clients I have for several years running, and they continue to be active clients. They were excited about it. A lot of them recognize, like, yes, this is what you do, and we're so excited to see you kind of repackaging and refocusing on that. Also, ideas led growth is a lot easier to say and spell than Syncrasys. If you're hearing the word Syncrasys and not seeing it in writing, try to spell it. I dare you. It maybe wasn't the best choice for a name, but I still love it in a lot of ways. But ideas led growth really does much more directly say, well, what am I doing for clients? What does my team actually deliver for clients? And the outcome is the ideas led growth.
Got it, Chris. Chris, thank you so much. It was a pleasure talking to you. Uh, Thank you so much again for your time. And yeah, I think we'll probably keep in touch and I'll see if we can do a second version of this podcast a year down the line with ideas
Sure.
led growth, expanding or growing.
I'd love that. No, this has been a great conversation, and I'd love to, thank you so much for inviting me and giving me the opportunity to share some of my thinking and experience with your audience. Much appreciated.
It was a pleasure, Chris. It was truly valuable. Before we leave, I'm just going to stop recording.